The relentless Oakhaven County sun beat down on Harmony Glens, turning the manicured lawns a shade too vibrant and baking the asphalt to a shimmering haze. Sheriff Jake the Hammer Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm, had hoped for a sliver of peace, a momentary respite from the ceaseless demands of his office. He'd deliberately left his Stetson in the precinct, trading it for a faded baseball cap, a flimsy disguise against the nosy neighbors and well-meaning but often intrusive citizens of Oakhaven. He was, after all, just Jake Harrison today, resident of 14 Willow Creek Lane in Harmony Glens, or so he wished to be. The lingering scent of stale coffee and official paperwork clung to him as he maneuvered his unmarked Ford Explorer, a dark, practical beast, into the driveway of his modest suburban home. He'd spent the morning mediating a dispute between feuding hog farmers and the afternoon untangling a jurisdictional mess involving a runaway llama. Just another Tuesday in Oakhaven County. But as he killed the engine and the Explorer's rumbling subsided, an anomaly snagged his attention. A golf cart. Not just any golf cart, but one festooned, rather pathetically, with strings of cheap blue LED lights that blinked with a frantic, unconvincing urgency. Homemade, laminated decals adhered haphazardly to its sides proclaimed it as the vehicle of the Harmony Glens PD. Sheriff Harrison's brow furrowed. Harmony Glens PD? He chuckled internally. The HOA was getting ambitious, it seemed. From this contraption emerged two figures like characters from a low-budget community theater production of a police drama. The first, lanky and angular, seemed poured into his beige uniform rather than wearing it, the fabric straining at his narrow shoulders and bunching awkwardly at his elbows. A thin, meticulously groomed mustache perched above his lip, defying gravity and good sense. He adjusted a peaked cap that sat too high on his head, giving him the air of a startled heron. His companion was his polar opposite, short, round, and radiating a damp heat even in the shade cast by Sheriff Harrison's oak tree. His uniform, identical to his partner's in its beige horror, was stretched taut across his ample frame, the belt cinched so tightly it seemed to impede his breathing. Beads of perspiration glistened on his forehead, and his face was set in an expression of theatrical sternness that wobbled precariously close to a grimace. They approached with a studied, almost comical gait of authority, each step too measured, their expressions too diligently serious. The taller one, whom Sheriff Harrison mentally dubbed Mustache, brandished a notepad that looked suspiciously like a repurposed shopping list from the local Piggly Wiggly. He cleared his throat with an exaggerated rumble, the sound cracking slightly on the uptake. "Sir," he began, his voice a reedy tenor that didn't quite match the intended gravitas, "you are hereby notified of a violation." He consulted his notepad as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Harmony Glens Ordinance. 34B subsection 7. Yes, subsection 7. Sheriff Harrison, leaning against the cool metal of his Explorer, felt a slow smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Fatigue battled with amusement in his eyes. He dealt with actual criminals, hardened men and women who understood the raw language of power and consequence. These were something else entirely. Ordinance 34B subsection 7, he repeated, a playful lilt in his voice. Fascinating. And what, pray tell, does this subsection 7 entail? He watched as Mustache's partner, Round, puffed himself up, adjusting the strangling belt with a furtive tug. Round stepped forward, his chest swelling like a bullfrog's, the laminated badge pinned to his shirt reflecting the sunlight like a miniature disco ball. Excessive vehicle, a presence, he declared, his voice a wheezing baritone punctuated by short, sharp gasps for air. Rule, clearly, states, only one vehicle, visibly, parked, at any given time. Each word was punctuated with a jerky nod, as if to underscore the irrefutable logic of his pronouncement. Sheriff Harrison glanced from Round's perspiring face to his own, perfectly legally parked, Explorer and back again. A chuckle started deep in his chest, a low rumble that threatened to erupt into outright laughter. "Gentlemen," he managed to say, suppressing the urge to guffaw, "are you suggesting I cannot park in my own driveway? In front of my own home?" Mustache, eyes darting nervously, consulted his notepad again, squinting at the scribbled lines as if they were written in a foreign language. It does appear to be the case, sir. Rules, you see. Very strictly enforced." He gestured vaguely with the notepad, his gaze fixed somewhere over Sheriff Harrison's shoulder, avoiding any direct eye contact. Sheriff Harrison straightened, the amusement receding, replaced by a prickle of unease. This was beyond just zealous HOA busybodies. There was something off about their demeanor, their rehearsed lines, the almost desperate insistence on their authority. "And who exactly?" Sheriff Harrison asked, his voice losing its playful edge, hardening to a low, steady tone. "Are you enforcing these rules on behalf of?" Round, apparently sensing an opening to assert himself, stepped forward again, puffing out his chest further, if that were even physically possible. He jabbed a finger towards his chest, nearly dislodging the laminated badge. "We are the Harmony Glens Patrol Deputies, sir. Duly appointed by the Harmony Glens Homeowners Association. We uphold law and order within the Glens." He finished with a flourish, an almost theatrical bow, as if expecting a round of applause from the silent, sun-baked street. Sheriff Harrison took a slow, deliberate breath, the air suddenly thick with unspoken tension. The quiet suburban street, moments ago mundane, now felt charged with an inexplicable undercurrent of something unsettling, something fundamentally wrong. He decided it was time to end the charade, to cut through the layers of pretense and get to the heart of this bizarre performance. With a measured movement, he reached into his back pocket, retrieving his wallet. From within, he extracted his official sheriff's badge, the silver star catching the fierce afternoon sun, radiating a genuine, undeniable authority that no laminated card or beige uniform could ever hope to replicate. He held it up, the silence stretching, punctuated only by the chirping of cicadas and the distant drone of a lawnmower. "Gentlemen," Sheriff Harrison stated, his voice now clear, firm, and resonant with the unmistakable weight of command, "I am Sheriff Jake Harrison. And I believe," his steel-gray eyes narrowed, focusing intently on the two men, "there has been a rather significant misunderstanding. Or perhaps, a chilling edge crept into his tone, something far more deliberate. Welcome to Harmony Glens, where not everything is harmonious or genuine. Fake HOA cops tried to arrest me, but I'm the real sheriff. Is starting now. Craving more tales from this unpredictable county? Subscribe and buckle up." The afternoon sun seemed to intensify as Sheriff Harrison held up his badge, the polished silver reflecting the light and casting a stark gleam in the eyes of the two men before him. The silence that followed was thick, almost palpable, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the frantic chirping of cicadas in the oak tree's shade. For a moment, neither Mustache nor Round moved. They seemed frozen, caught in the headlights of an oncoming truth they were ill-prepared to face. Mustache's meticulously groomed mustache twitched almost imperceptibly, and Round's perspiring face seemed to drain of color, leaving a pasty residue in its wake. The confidence, the manufactured authority they had so carefully cultivated, seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon. Then a flicker of something, disbelief? Defiance? Sparked in Mustache's eyes. It was subtle, almost fleeting, but Sheriff Harrison, a man trained to read the minute shifts in human behavior, caught it. Mustache blinked, and the flicker hardened into a steely glint, a desperate attempt to reclaim lost ground. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing awkwardly in his thin neck. Badge, you say?" he stammered, his voice losing its rehearsed baritone and rising into a nervous squeak. He peered at the silver star, squinting as if struggling to bring it into focus. That's a shiny thing. Very convincing." He attempted a weak chuckle, which died in his throat like a strangled cough. Round, recovering slightly from his initial shock, echoed the sentiment, albeit with less finesse. "Yeah," he chimed in, his voice still breathy but gaining a semblance of its earlier bluster. "Lots of, costume shops sell badges for parties and plays." He nodded vigorously, as if the sheer force of his agreement could make their flimsy pretense a reality. Sheriff Harrison lowered his badge just slightly, never breaking eye contact. His gaze remained fixed, unwavering on the two men. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of steel that brooked no argument, "this isn't a costume. This is my official sheriff's badge. It signifies my authority as the highest law enforcement officer in Oak Haven County. And you," he paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air, "are impersonating law enforcement. That's a serious offense. Very serious." Mustache and Round exchanged a frantic, almost panicked glance. The air of bravado was evaporating rapidly, leaving behind a residue of palpable fear. Mustache fumbled with his notepad again, flipping through the pages as if searching for a loophole, a forgotten ordinance that could magically extricate them from this predicament. "Well, Sheriff, Harrison, he began, his voice wavering, the carefully crafted authority now completely gone, replaced by a thin veneer of desperation. With all due respect, we have our own authority. Granted, by the we are within our rights to enforce HOA rules. He gestured vaguely with the notepad, his eyes darting nervously from Sheriff Harrison's badge to his face and back again. Round, attempting to bolster his partner's crumbling defense, stepped forward, his hands clenched into sweaty fists. Yeah. HOA authority. It's like separate from county stuff. We are Glenn's jurisdiction. He finished lamely, the invented phrase sounding hollow even to his own ears. Sheriff Harrison allowed a ghost of a smile to play on his lips, a smile that held no humor, only a grim understanding. Glenn's jurisdiction? He repeated, his voice dripping with irony. And who exactly is the legal authority of this? Glenn's jurisdiction? Who deputized you? Who trained you? Who authorized you to drive around in a golf cart with flashing lights, telling people they can't park in their own driveways? He took a step closer, his imposing frame casting a longer shadow over the two men. Because last I checked, the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Office is the only legally recognized law enforcement agency in this county. And I certainly didn't deputize either of you. The two men recoiled slightly, their forced bravado finally collapsing under the weight of Sheriff Harrison's unwavering authority. Mustache's notepad slipped from his trembling fingers, fluttering to the manicured lawn like a discarded leaf. Round sweaty fists unclenched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment they stood in silence, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them. The game was up. Their charade had been exposed. And standing before them, radiating an undeniable aura of power and legitimacy, was the real deal, Sheriff Jake the Hammer Harrison himself. Then, just as Sheriff Harrison was about to press further, to demand answers and uncover the truth behind their bizarre impersonation, a new sound cut through the afternoon stillness. A shrill, piercing whistle. It came from behind the golf cart, from the direction of the street. All three men turned instinctively towards the sound. Emerging from behind the cart, stepping out onto the sidewalk, was a third figure. This one was different. Taller than both Mustache and Round, leaner, and moving with a purposeful stride that was markedly different from their clumsy attempts at authority. He was also clad in a beige uniform, but this one seemed to fit better, to be of a slightly higher quality. And on his chest, glinting in the sun, was a badge. Not a laminated homemade badge, but something that looked real. He blew the whistle again, a sharp, commanding sound that echoed in the quiet suburban street. He approached with an air of cool confidence, his eyes fixed not on Sheriff Harrison but on Mustache and Round. And as he drew closer, a chilling realization dawned on Sheriff Harrison. This new figure wasn't just another overzealous HOA volunteer. There was something about his bearing, his posture, the cold calculation in his eyes that sent a shiver of unease down Sheriff Harrison's spine. This wasn't just incompetence or misguided enthusiasm. This was something else entirely. And the game in Harmony Glens, Sheriff Harrison suspected, had just taken a very dangerous and very unexpected turn. The shrill whistle blast hung in the air, momentarily silencing the chirping cicadas and freezing Mustache and Round in their tracks. The new figure, emerging from behind the ridiculous golf cart, moved with a confidence that was unsettlingly genuine. He exuded a controlled energy that was a stark contrast to the bumbling ineptitude of the first two. His beige uniform, while still undeniably beige, seemed crisper, sharper, almost tailored. And the badge on his chest wasn't some flimsy, laminated imitation. It was solid, metallic, and caught the sunlight with a cold, authoritative glint. As he approached, Sheriff Harrison studied him intently, his law enforcement instincts kicking into high gear. This wasn't just another HOA volunteer playing dress-up. This man carried himself with a practiced ease, a certain familiarity with command that sent a tremor of unease through Sheriff Harrison. He moved like someone who had worn a badge before and not a fake one. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Mustache and Round with a dismissive contempt before settling on Sheriff Harrison. "What's going on here, deputies?" the newcomer asked, his voice smooth, baritone, and laced with an edge of steel that made the deputy's designation sound more like a sarcastic jab than a genuine title. Mustache and Round seemed to deflate further under his gaze, their earlier bravado completely extinguished, They mumbled something incoherent, a jumble of excuses and panicked justifications, their eyes darting nervously between the newcomer and Sheriff Harrison. The newcomer ignored their stammering, his attention remaining fixed on Sheriff Harrison. He stopped a few feet away, his posture relaxed but radiating an underlying tension. He offered a curt nod, his expression unreadable. "Officer Davies," he introduced himself, extending a hand towards Sheriff Harrison. "Harmony Glens Public Safety." The name and title sounded polished, professional, disturbingly legitimate. Sheriff Harrison hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking Officer Davies' hand. His grip was firm, controlled, and sent another subtle warning signal to Sheriff Harrison's senses. This was no ordinary individual. "Sheriff Jake Harrison," Sheriff Harrison replied, returning the firm handshake, his eyes locked on Davies' face, searching for any flicker of deception. "Oak Haven County Sheriff's Office." He allowed his own badge to catch the light again, letting the silent authority of his position speak for itself. Davies' eyes flickered down to the sheriff's badge, then back up to Harrison's face. There was a moment of tense silence, a silent standoff where two forces, two claims of authority, clashed in the quiet suburban street. Then a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Davies' lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a cold, calculated expression that sent a chill down Sheriff Harrison's spine. "Sheriff Harrison," Davies repeated, the name rolling smoothly off his tongue. "Well, Sheriff, it seems my deputies may have caused a slight misunderstanding regarding a parking violation." He glanced dismissively at Mustache and Round, who visibly flinched under his gaze. "They're still in training," Davies added with a sardonic undertone that suggested incompetent would be a more accurate description. He turned his attention back to Sheriff Harrison, his smile widening just a fraction, but still lacking any warmth. "Perhaps we can resolve this misunderstanding? Sheriff to sheriff, as it were?" The phrase "sheriff to sheriff" was delivered with a deliberate emphasis, almost a challenge. Sheriff Harrison's ness heightened. This Officer Davies was playing a game, and Sheriff Harrison had a feeling it was a dangerous one. Something about Davies' polished demeanor, his too-smooth voice, and the unsettling coldness in his eyes screamed fake, even louder than Mustache and Round's ridiculous charade. But this was a different kind of fake. This was a calculated, practiced deception. "Misunderstanding is one word for it, Officer Davies," Sheriff Harrison replied, his voice steady and even, betraying none of the unease churning within him. "Impersonating law enforcement, harassing citizens, and operating under false pretenses might be a few others." He gestured towards Mustache and Round with a pointed look. "And I'm still waiting for a satisfactory explanation for all of this." Davies chuckled softly, a low, humorless sound. Sheriff, you wound me. False pretenses? We are simply ensuring the smooth functioning of our community, upholding the rules and regulations set forth by the Harmony Glens Homeowners Association. We are community safety officers. Aiding in neighborhood harmony. The word harmony dripped with irony as he spoke it. "Perhaps," Davies continued, his voice taking on a more persuasive tone, "we can discuss this in a more private setting? Away from the midday heat and the distractions?" He gestured towards Sheriff Harrison's house with a subtle inclination of his head. "Perhaps inside? Over a cool drink? I'm sure we can clear up any confusion." Sheriff to sheriff. His eyes held a strange intensity, a silent invitation that felt more like a veiled threat. Sheriff Harrison felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about parking violations or overzealous HOA rules anymore. This was something deeper, something darker. And Officer Davies, this polished, unsettling newcomer, was at the heart of it. He knew, with a gut certainty that had served him well throughout his career, that turning his back on Davies, walking away, would be a mistake. He had stumbled upon something rotten in Harmony Glens, and he wasn't about to leave it festering in the shade. He met Davies' gaze, his own eyes hardening, reflecting the steely glint he saw in Davies' own. "All right, Officer Davies," Sheriff Harrison said, his voice low and steady, the sheriff to sheriff phrase echoing Davies' own challenge. "Let's talk. Inside." Sheriff Harrison gestured Davies towards his front door, a silent invitation into the modest ranch home that was his sanctuary from the chaos of Oak Haven County. As they walked, Davies maintained his unervingly smooth demeanor, a carefully constructed facade that Sheriff Harrison was determined to dismantle. Mustache and Round trailed behind, looking utterly defeated, their beige uniforms now seeming less like costumes of authority and more like garments of shame. Inside, Sheriff Harrison led Davies to his living room, a comfortably cluttered space filled with family photos, well-worn furniture, and the comforting scent of home. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated aura that Davies exuded. "Make yourselves comfortable," Sheriff Harrison said, his voice polite but firm, gesturing to the sofa. He remained standing, positioning himself between Davies and the doorway, a subtle but clear assertion of control on his own territory. Davies, however, remained standing as well, his eyes scanning the room with a cold, assessing gaze that seemed to strip away the warmth and familiarity. "Sheriff," Davies began, turning to face Harrison directly, his smooth baritone now edged with a sharper intensity, "let's dispense with the pleasantries. We both know this isn't about a parking violation." He paused, his gaze locking onto Sheriff Harrison's. "Harmony Glens is a unique community. We maintain order, our own way." Sheriff Harrison met his gaze unflinchingly. "Order built on deception and impersonation? That's not order, Davies. That's a house of cards waiting to collapse. And I'm here to make sure it does." Davies' smile tightened, losing any semblance of politeness. "You misunderstand, Sheriff. Harmony Glens operates outside of your jurisdiction. We are self-governed. We handle our own affairs." "Outside my jurisdiction?" Sheriff Harrison scoffed, stepping closer to Davies, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "This is Oakhaven County, Davies. Every square inch of it. And last time I checked, impersonating law enforcement and harassing citizens is against the law everywhere, even in your unique community. Davies' carefully constructed composure finally began to crack. A flicker of anger flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by a calculating coldness. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff. Interfering in things you don't understand." He took a step closer to Sheriff Harrison, mirroring his aggressive posture. "Harmony Glens is protected. We have resources. You don't want to make enemies here." "Threats, Davies?" Sheriff Harrison challenged, his voice hardening to steel. "Is that what your community safety officers training taught you? Intimidation." He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. "Because let me tell you something, Davies. I faced down real threats, real criminals who make your little beige brigade look like a Cub Scout troop. And I'm not intimidated by fancy uniforms or empty promises of resources. Just then a sudden commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, shouts, and the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming shattered the tense standoff in the living room. Sheriff Harrison and Davies both turned towards the sound, a shared moment of surprise momentarily breaking their locked gaze. Sheriff Harrison moved swiftly to the window, peering out onto his front yard. His eyes widened in grim satisfaction. Parked haphazardly along the street were several Oakhaven County Sheriff's Office cruisers, their blue and red lights flashing, casting an authoritative glow over Harmony Glens. Deputy Miller and Deputy Chin, two of Sheriff Harrison's most trusted officers, were already directing uniformed deputies towards the golf cart and towards Mustache and Round, who were now being relieved of their ridiculous patrol deputy gear with a distinct lack of ceremony. Sheriff Harrison turned back to Davies, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Looks like my jurisdiction just expanded to your doorstep, Davies." Davies' face had paled, his carefully crafted composure finally crumbling completely. The smooth facade was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury and dawning panic. You can't do this," Davies stammered, his voice losing its smooth baritone, rising in pitch and desperation. "You have no right." "No right." Sheriff Harrison chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Davies, I'm the sheriff. Upholding the law is exactly my right. And right now I'm exercising it." He pointed towards the door with a commanding gesture. "Outside. Now, we're going to have a little chat with my deputies. And then you and I are going to take a little trip downtown. To the real sheriff's office. Where you can explain to me in detail exactly what this Harmony Glens public safety operation is really about." Davies, realizing the game was truly over, offered no further resistance. He was led out of the house by Sheriff Harrison, the defeated figure of Officer Davies, now exposed for the hollow man he truly was. Outside, Chaos reigned momentarily as the deputies efficiently secured the scene, taking Mustache and Round into custody and examining the laughably equipped golf cart. As Sheriff Harrison watched Davies being placed in the back of a cruiser, he knew this was far from over. The parking violation had unraveled a much larger, more sinister thread in Harmony Glens. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed the full extent of Davies' scheme. Harmony Glens Public Safety was not just an overzealous HOA initiative. It was a meticulously crafted operation designed to exert control over the community for Davies' own nefarious purposes. Davies, it turned out, was a former security contractor with a history of shady dealings and a thirst for power. He had infiltrated the HOA, using charm and manipulation to gain influence and establish his private security force, preying on the residents' desire for safety and order. The HOA rules were often arbitrarily enforced, used to intimidate and control residents who questioned Davies' authority or posed a threat to his hidden agenda. The fines and violations were a thinly veiled extortion racket, funneling money into Davies' personal accounts and funding his operation. Mustache and Round, it turned out, were simply hapless individuals, lured in with promises of authority and purpose, easily manipulated by Davies' charismatic personality. They were more misguided than malicious, ultimately just pawns in Davies' larger game. Sheriff Harrison, with the full force of the Oakhaven County Sheriff's Office behind him, dismantled Davies' operation, exposing his scheme to the residents of Harmony Glens. The shock and outrage in the community were palpable, quickly turning to gratitude as the real sheriff restored genuine law and order to their streets. Davies, facing a multitude of charges including impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and extortion, found himself trading his crisp beige uniform for the drab orange jumpsuit of the county jail. Mustache and Round, after cooperating fully with the investigation and demonstrating genuine remorse, received lighter sentences, their misguided foray into law enforcement serving as a harsh lesson in the difference between real authority and a cheap imitation. Harmony Glens, once a community living under a fabricated sense of security and controlled by a hollow man in a beige uniform, slowly began to heal. The real sheriff, Jake the Hammer Harrison, had not only stopped a parking violation, but had also unearthed and eradicated a dangerous deception, reaffirming that in Oakhaven County and indeed in Harmony Glens, there was only one true law and only one true sheriff. As the sun set over a newly peaceful Harmony Glens, Sheriff Harrison, back in his Stetson and behind the wheel of his Ford Explorer, drove away, leaving behind a community finally safe, not from parking violations, but from the real threat that had been lurking beneath the veneer of suburban tranquility. His day, which had started with paperwork and precinct coffee, had ended with a far more satisfying kind of closure. The quiet satisfaction of justice served, and the unwavering assurance that even in the most ironically named corners of his county, the real sheriff always prevails. Justice served, case closed. But the stories don't stop here. Subscribe for more Oakhaven County tales of intrigue and real sheriff action.